post-COVID-19 period, because we want to put the thumb on the scale, get the rightful balance of what comes out of taxation to ensure that we can get that public, that basket of public service goods. And I'm just esteemed to at least introduce this topic to you. Let us quickly first run through our background to this entire discussion. So, Mr. Producer, if we can pretty well go with the background to the discussion. Let us begin with the Uganda Revenue Authority half-year performance report that stipulated that during the period July to December 2009, Uganda Revenue Authority collected 9,042.01 billion and posted a growth of revenue in 11.15% in comparison to the same period, or in comparison to the same period. This reflects a growth in the revenue of 907.05 billion, and it should be noted that the outturn is short of the projected figure of 9,739.39 billion by 697.38 billion, and that is according to the Uganda Revenue Authority's report, half-year performance report that was issued out just a couple of months ago, or just a couple of months back. Let us go to the domestic revenues. How much were we able to collect? The total domestic revenue collections during the period July to December 2019 was 5,673.57 billion against the target of 6,109.66 billion. And this outturn in the revenue reflects a growth of 831.91 billion, and that is 17.8 compared to the same period in the 2018. So underperformance in value-added tax or value-added tax due to a lower expected outturn on a lower than expected outturn of 92.02 billion on phone talk time. So people were not talking on phone. We got a shortfall, and that was 38.27 billion on sugar and 28.62 billion on beer. And when it comes to wholesale and retail trade, it was about 41.32 billion from the wholesale and retail trade. How much were we able to get in terms of international taxes, or the money that we collect from getting things from abroad? We're able to collect a good figure of money, and we could be able to just take that off head to be able to at least know how much we were able to collect when it comes to the international taxes. We were able to collect during the period of July to December 2019. It was 3,537.31 billion, reflecting a suppressed growth in the customs growth tax revenue of 2.80%. Who do we have on set to be able to discuss this and more and decipher this entire information, this big piece of information for us to be able to understand? I'm delighted to introduce my esteemed panel tonight. I'm having Sisi Kagaba online, and Sisi, a very warm welcome aboard. Thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you very much for hosting me.
Sisi Kagaba, who is the Executive Director at ACU. ACU is Anti-Corruption Coalition Uganda. And joining me live from studios at the Business Information Center is Jen Nalunga. Jen, a very warm welcome on set.
Thank you so much, and good evening, viewers.
All right, that is the panel that we are having to discuss this and more. We'll be later on joined by Mr. John Walugembe on set. Mr. John Walugembe, thank you so much for getting some time to speak to us, and a very good evening to you.
Good evening to you, and thank you for having me, and good evening to the viewers.
That is John Walugembe joining us live from where he is. So let us first quickly run through, do we have the time, Mr. Producer, to be able to go? All right, we do not have a lot of time according to production. So let us get at least the understanding of this entire discussion from all the panelists. Let us begin, if I could just begin with you, Sisi. Kindly take us through what your 5 minutes, like five, just keep it short for us to be able to decipher and understand the tax policies in Uganda.
Well, I may not really say I'm an expert of tax. That's why I think you have Jen in the studio. But I think if I'm to look at a governance and accountability part, one of the things I would look at when you're talking of taxation is, one, when monies are collected, do we see accountability? And when it comes to taxation, is everyone being taxed? Because you see, again, there has to be fairness when you're talking of taxation. Is everyone being taxed? And then when we again talk of issues of taxation, who is actually being taxed? How narrow or how broad is the taxation base? And then secondly, there's a whole issue of tax exemptions. Who is being offered these exemptions? And as a country, what are we benefiting from these tax exemptions? But I think for me, by and large, if I'm looking at the broader issue of taxation, my area would be more to do with accountability and whether there's value for money for the taxes. Because what we need to appreciate is that why is there taxation? At the end of it all, it has to be improved service delivery. So do we see any improvement in the service delivery with the various taxes that the government has imposed?
So much, Sisi, for giving us that good background. For you, it would be much more of accountability. Let us pick it from there, Mr. Walugembe, if you can get to hear us. What is your view about Uganda's taxation policy at the time?
Thank you very much. I believe that as Sisi has mentioned, and as you mentioned in your background, what we have now is a policy that seeks to ensure that we increase our domestic tax revenue. Although we hope to generate most of the resources that finance our budget and the current expenditure domestically, it has not been possible so far. And the taxation policy is therefore geared at generating as many resources as are necessary to run government. What may be missing in a taxation policy from our perspective is the incentivization, because taxation plays many roles. One, to encourage production, but also to disincentivize certain activities and incentivize others. So the taxation policy that we have now, I think it is failing to straddle that balance between generating resources, incentivizing production, and disincentivizing certain other activities.
If I could just pick on you, Dr. Fred Muhumuza has also been able to join us online, and we'll get to him later. Let me first speak on you, Mrs. Jen Nalunga. What is your view of Uganda's taxation policy, and anyway, is it adequate to address all the underlying issues?
Thank you so much, Hakim. I want to add on to the issue which Mr. Walugembe has raised, that Uganda's tax policy, like all tax policies everywhere, is to raise revenue, to provide social services, to provide infrastructure. But as you read out in your at the beginning of this conversation, there is a shortfall, and you find that government today is caught in between raising revenue to provide those services, but also to provide relief for the companies which are struggling. And for me, this is a delicate line which we need to discuss to see how government can be able to walk that tightrope. But maybe I'll add on later. I don't know how much time I have. I can add on some proposals on that, what needs to be done, because today the situation today is not business as usual when it comes to mobilizing taxes. You know, the economy has contracted because of the COVID. The economy is ailing, the businesses are ailing. So government has in fact to put in place measures to ensure that the economy, the businesses are moving. But later on I will talk about the guidelines, how government can be able to do that.
All right, thank you so much, Jane Nalunga. So Dr. Fred Muhumuza has been able to join us, though he hasn't been able to turn on the video. Dr. Fred Muhumuza, if you can get to hear us, just greet us and let us know if you're there. Let us first pick on you. Let us first understand what is the basis for government being able to collect all these taxes, and anyway later to the bigger question of whether it really goes ahead to account fully, right, to the taxes it really collects. And I've heard in a number of fora you pointed out to the fact that you are required as civil society to be able to present some of the proposals in a period that you found very unrealistic, right? Because you found that period very shorter. Let me first speak your notion about the tax amendments and whether civil society has been able to at least contribute broadly to the discussion of the tax proposals. Okay,
as civil society, a number of organizations are working on tax policy. In fact, there is also a loose organization of civil society members working on tax issues called the Tax Justice Alliance, and we are able to put some views on table, but that was before the COVID crisis. And for me, Hakim, I think when we are discussing, we need to discuss the peculiar situation which COVID pandemic has put us into, and be able to situate the tax measures within that post-pandemic recovery. And like I said, I think when we are discussing, I would like to give four guidelines, which government can use when it comes to putting in place tax measures. One is the issue of strengthening the fiscal discipline. We need fiscal discipline, and I will leave that aspect to Sise, who is good at issues of accountability. There is the issue of recovery, economic recovery. At the end of the day, when we talk about tax measures, taxation shouldn't be an end in itself, that we have collected so much, this month we collected so much. The end result is to grow the economy. So we shouldn't lose sight of that when we are discussing the tax measure. And these tax measures shouldn't undermine economic recovery, but it should promote it. Another guideline is the issue which Cisse raised about equity. You know, the tax measures should be equitable, they should be fair, they should be efficient. Because when you look at the crisis, the post-COVID crisis has been regressive. It's the poor who are being affected more. So tax measures shouldn't increase that burden. And lastly, we need to make a distinction when we are discussing tax measures between measures which are temporary, maybe in 2-6 months, and measures which are going to be permanent. So if we are talking about tax incentive to a certain sector, we should have it in mind that either it's temporary or it's permanent, but we need to separate that. So for me, when you look at those guidelines, they entail a delicate balancing. But at the end of that day, the tax measures should be equitable, should be fair, they should be efficient.
Thank you so much. I really hear you when you speak about the taxation system being fair and equitable. It plays within the ambit of the fundamental canons of taxation. So Dr. Fred Muhumuza and Sisi Kagaba, who are joining us live on Zoom, kindly kindly just turn on your cameras such that we can be able to see you, because you can see us, so it only becomes fair that we can also be able to see you. So kindly just switch on so we can be able to find you. Sisi, let me just speak on you since you've been able to return, and Dr. Fred Muhumuza. So let me just wait for you to be able to stabilize and be able to do that. Dr. Muhumuza's video hasn't been turned on as yet and is busy driving. Let us first cross over to Mr. Warugembe and get to pick your notion on whether our tax system has been progressive enough to tax those that have the more, and to at least tax those that have less.
Okay, so the tax system that we have, I think, aspires to be progressive. I wouldn't say that it has been progressive enough. And by progressive, I mean, do the rich pay their fair share? And do the poor pay their fair share proportionate to their wealth? And I would say that in many aspects, we have failed. And Madam Nalunga mentioned the issue of tax incentives that are predominantly given to large multinational firms that are coming that are bringing money in the form of foreign direct investment. Obviously, this is good and it is important that they are incentivized. But it's also critical that that incentivization is not at the cost of local SMEs. So I would say that, and then after the big multinationals get all these tax incentives, you hear people saying, oh, small businesses don't pay tax. The informal sector does not pay its fair share, which is very interesting because what you have is a system now that emphasizes indirect taxation. So in a system that emphasizes indirect taxation, people pay tax every time they consume. So these kinds of consumption taxes, in fact, tend to affect the poor the most, because proportionate to their income, they tend to pay more tax because everyone pays the same, and the poor end up paying more based on how much they earn. So I think there is need to refine our tax system to remove any kind of distortion, especially in the area of incentives, and also to look at how can our tax system support our broader objectives. So for instance, if you're talking about Buy Uganda, Build Uganda, how should the taxation system be in order to disincentivize people having to import all kinds of things? Recently, you have this whole issue of second-hand clothes. How do you ensure that the taxation system does not encourage people to import second-hand clothes? How do you ensure that the taxation system provides benefits to local SMEs that are trying to add value to our cotton? So these are all issues that need to be discussed, and I think there's a long way to go in reforming the system. Obviously, the COVID situation presents a unique challenge because now the figures that you presented at the start of this program become useless because they no longer provide a proper basis for us to discuss. We are in a territory called the unknown. We don't know how many businesses will be alive after this and how much will they be willing or able to pay. So it's tough, and I can imagine what URA is thinking right now. Their projections now no longer make sense. So it's a tough situation, and I hope that as SMEs we can do a bit to make our contribution to the national resource envelope.
Insight into the small and medium enterprises and how they can be able to save. Over to you, Sisi Kagaba, now to discuss the issue of accountability of the taxes. Have our taxes been accounted for in the best way possible in your analysis? And if not, in just a number of minutes, be able to at least tell us some of those recommendations that can fully help to bring accountability on table?
Thank you very much. I want to pick up on what Jen said on the whole issue of fiscal discipline. You see, probably URA or the agencies that are collecting taxes, they may do their part in as far as collecting the necessary taxes, but I mean, our leaders, do they have the discipline to use those resources equitably? I mean, during this period of COVID, we've seen what has happened. You have people, just like the president was saying, there's some MPs that decided to turn themselves into procurement people. They first get the 20M, and then the next time we're hearing they're getting 40 million now. This is actually taxpayers' money. And I think for me, that is lack of fiscal discipline. So even the monies that would have been used for other things, you realize that you have a group of people that is continuously benefiting from this amount of monies. And we need again to think of post-COVID. Because right now when you look at most of the government directives or some of the plans that we see for government, for me, what I tend to see is the now. We are looking at now, but have we thought of after? Of course, we know COVID is going to be with us for quite some time, but what measures have we put in place to cater for the after? Because that is also going to be very, very important. I think for me, when you ask what recommendations, I think for me, I mean, as a country, we know what we should be able to do, but the only challenge has been is that at times we fail to do that which we are supposed to do, and we continuously come up with different excuses to justify our fiscal indiscipline. Give an example of supplementary budgets. How often, if you look at a breakdown of some of the supplementary items that, for example, go to the State House, I mean, some of them are donations. What criteria is used to give out a donation? Because remember, you're dealing with taxpayers' money. Even if it is a donation, it has to be accounted for. Is there a clear criteria that is used to be given out? And I think as civil society, one of the things I know that we need to do more is to look at some of these supplementary budgets that are given to particular entities. We need to look at line items, item by item, to see whether actually some of these items are actually, whether some of these actions are, whether some of these items that are in these supplementary budgets are actually justifiable, and whether we see any overall improvement of services. So I think for me, when it comes to issues of fiscal discipline, what needs to be done, actually, I think we already know what we need to do. We just need to go back to the drawing table and know that monies are supposed to be used for this. Again, lastly, we have all these very many people that have given us money for this COVID process. Do we have a plan? Do we know what these monies are supposed to be used for? I know IMF has given us money, and I think IMF has been somewhat clear on what some of their monies are supposed to do. But we have people who have donated. Do you have a plan to know that these monies are going to do A, B, C, D, or we are merely just stashing money away and just give? Because at the end of it all, we are going to get into what you call double dipping, whereby particular agencies are getting money 2 or 3 more times. So I think, and again, that goes back to the discipline and how we're using our resources. I mean, we have very good policies that actually should be able to guide us on how some of these resources are supposed to be used.
All right, thank you so much, Sisi, for sharing, because your insights seem to allude to the fact that for you don't have any issue when it comes to the tax policy. You find it adequate, but yours is about accountability, right?
Yes, it's about accountability and basically equity. Who, I mean, if you're giving tax holidays, you're giving tax exemptions, who and what is the criteria? And I think for me, that, I mean, I know the Tax Justice Network, I think where Jen represents, there have been issues of exemptions, who is being exempted, why this and why not this, and for me again that goes back to equity. Do people understand and appreciate why particular companies are exempted and others are not given exemptions?
Thank you so much, Sisi Kagaba, for sharing your insights when it comes to equity in the processes. And now, if I could just be able to at least bring the discussion to you, Jen, now you realize the discussion is becoming much more broader. But let us talk more about the issue of the incentives. I want you to be able to couple it with the fact that the State Minister in charge of the general duties on 9th November, Gabriel Ajedra, called for a review of the tax policy. And that was after citing out the different loopholes that little loss of revenue, at least for the country, pointed out to the fact that most corporate companies pay corporation tax that is between 0 and 2%. Right, which is in terms of I mean the kind of money that they make, and he proposes that it should be at least a 3 to 4% for the SMEs, 3 to 4% of the gross turnover. And now the multinationals, all right, the multinationals pay the amount of taxes on their net profit, yet the local companies are being taxed on their gross turnover, which brings the discrepancies. I want you to be able to couple the issue of the tax incentives and the unclear policy of issuing out, or the criteria for giving out the tax incentives, together with the amendment or together with the proposal from the minister.
Okay, thank you so much, Hakim, and thanks to the previous to Sise and Mr. Walugembe for raising these issues around the tax exemptions and the tax broadly, the leakages. You know, somebody was even saying that our basket, you know, our envelope where we put our taxes is leaking. In fact, that the bottom is even bigger than the top where we put the money. You know, so there are so many leakages, and one of them is tax exemption. And for me, I think we need to put more light on the tax exemptions, because when you look at the whole issue around post-COVID recovery, you know, they have all these loans we are getting from IMF World Bank. They are targeting giving tax exemptions to some companies to help them continue, you know, as a going concern and be able to employ people, you know. So the challenge which has been on tables has been pointed out is the issue of transparency. In fact, when you read the Auditor General's report of 2017, he raised this issue. The tax exemptions are given, there are no guidelines. Sometimes it's executive orders, give so and so, and there are no reviews to be able to review to assess the cost benefits, the cost and, you know, balance the cost and benefits. You can't know how much government is benefiting from these tax incentives, whether these companies are employing people, whether they are giving them a living wage, whether, you know. So at the end of the day, we don't know how much we are benefiting from these tax exemptions. So for me, I think it's really important that we engage on this issue. Government should put in place guidelines who should be getting these tax exemptions, because you see tax exemptions sometimes are not bad per se. For example, if somebody, Hakim, you have a company, you are going to put your factory in Ruweru. You are going to employ, you know, you are going to employ a number of people. You are going to add value to their pineapples. You know, why don't you get an incentive? Maybe government to pay for you electricity. Maybe to ensure that you get electricity to your factory. You know. So, but the whole issue is transparency, to put guidelines in place, to be able to review and to be able to put it in the public domain. You know, who is Hakim? Is he a Ugandan? You know, we call that beneficial ownership. Who is benefiting from that company? Who owns it?
All right, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jen. If I could just be able to pick on you, Mr. Walugembe, if you could just be able to hear us, share with us at least your full understanding about these multinationals being able to pay tax on their net profit, yet for you as the small and medium enterprises, they are using a different criteria for taxation of you. And then maybe you can highlight the issue about the double taxation agreements that the Uganda Revenue Authority Alice grants.
Okay, so I think this whole issue of multinationals, okay, first of all, multinationals have the resources and have access to experts that can help them to avoid tax. Now, as you know, tax avoidance is completely legal. You get a tax expert who can help you look at the tax regime, identify loopholes, and then see how to maximize your benefit. So inherently, multinationals are advantaged, and multinationals that come and invest in developing countries like ours have already studied our tax regimes and seen how to maximally benefit from it. So if you couple this ability for them to avoid tax legally, and you couple it with the very generous tax relief measures that they receive, you'll find that these big multinationals end up paying very little tax compared to how much money they make and externalize. Indeed, it's not just a Ugandan phenomenon. Even in Europe, you find that big multinationals based in...
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Walugembe. So he has been able to highlight the fact that multinationals at least are incentivized more in terms of having high capital and then being able to give the access to the people that can enable them to be able to avoid the taxes. Sisi, let us speak on from the discussion of incentivization of the multinationals than the local or the domestic producers here at home.
Well, I think again, this is not so much of my area, but again, speaking as a layperson, I think when we look at more of incentivizing the multinationals, I think Mr. Walugembe brought it out, but you see, for a local person, they're going to feel that probably they're not being taken care of. And I think, like Jen was saying, the whole issue of exemptions, in most cases, you're going to find the people who are exempted are, what you call investors. Now, when you actually go down and look at this person that is being referred to as an investor, at times you find that they actually cannot even fit to be investors. Now, some of these so-called investors have taxes. Their taxes are going to be exempted at the detriment of probably other local companies in the country. And that is why at times you find the whole issue of people feeling that exemptions are not fair. And again, going back to the whole issue, if you're talking of exemptions, as a country, how have we benefited? Because we've also heard of situations whereby particular investors come or companies come, they're given a tax exemption of like maybe 7 years. When the 7 years are ending, they close shop, go to another country. They are given exemptions. When the years are almost coming, it's like a cycle. And at the end of it all, who is actually benefiting? You're giving these people tax exemptions. They're actually benefiting at the detriment of the country. And you have other people that are not benefiting because it is just, it is just like, benefit and then afterwards you go. So what measures have we put in place to ensure that this doesn't happen? But again, we've also heard of situations whereby exemptions are given to a particular company towards the end of its maybe period of exemption. It changes and it comes back as a different, company. And at the end of it all, we're asking ourselves as a country, how are we benefiting? Because these are all taxes that are actually being exempted. These people are actually benefiting, and as a country, we're not benefiting. And yet the other entities that should have actually been able to benefit from this. I think for me, that is the thing that we ought to listen to understand. And of course, and the other issue that we need to appreciate is when you're talking of multinationals, because of the whole issue of taxation, some of them can under-declare or they tend to show that they haven't made profits. And if you're to look at the bigger picture, it at times leads to what you call money laundering. And you see quite a number of multinationals have faced issues of money laundering because of, either avoiding or under-declaring. There's a lot that actually happens when it comes to taxation. But again, I think at times it's important that we make that connection of taxation and money laundering, because those two at times go hand in hand, especially when it comes to multinationals.
Quickly, just talk about the value-added tax rate in Uganda. the thresholds when it comes to pay as you earn, and whether their reduction could help to commendably reduce the amount of money that is being paid out in form of tax and then leave a little bit of money for the people.
Of course, you are evident allowed to anything that to do with anything like reducing of taxes. I know that is something that they can't buy into. I mean, and they'll continuously tell you we need more. But I mean, it would be a very good idea. But the issue is, what I know also is that the tax base is a bit narrow. The people that they're taxing are not as many. So that's why you find that each and every other year, government will try to either add on more taxes for people to pay without necessarily widening the tax base. So I really don't, and by the way, I think as a country, I think if the tax base was widened and maybe we maintain the status quo, but our discipline, as long as we have fiscal discipline, I think for me, some of these things we're talking about should actually have been taken care of. If you're talking of exemptions, and I mean, exempt even these SMEs, I don't know that is possible, but if we're looking at having money in the hands of people, if some of those were possible, then, well, I'm thinking, some of these issues would be addressed.
Thank you so much, Cici Kagawa, for sharing your insights right there. Let's swiftly cross over and talk to Mrs. Jane Nalunga here. The amount of money that is put as a threshold for you to qualify for some of the incentives, you've had $1 million from the Uganda Revenue Authority, right? How fair is that in terms of promotion of local investment or domestic investment? And anyway, could we find a particular way through which we could reconcile at least to promote the local producers more?
Thank you so much, Hakim. I think when you look at the threshold, it's very high for our SMEs. And for me, I think there should be different thresholds for the multinationals and for the locals. But I also want to emphasize on the issue of the multinationals and their privileged position in the economy. You talked about the DTAs, the double taxation agreements. Uganda has signed a number of them. DTAs, when a country signs a double taxation treaty with another country, for example, Uganda has a DTA with Mauritius, it has a DTA with Netherlands. So any company which is domiciled in, for example, Mauritius, will not pay taxes here. We say I will pay my taxes in Mauritius. But Mauritius is a tax haven. Tax havens are those countries where they don't pay taxes, So you find a company, they are post office companies. And I remember in the newspapers, there was one time a company here which was registered there, and they took all their money there. They didn't want to pay taxes here. So when you look at, a number of companies have used that loophole to register their companies in those tax havens which have an agreement, a double taxation agreement with Uganda. So these are the issues, and what I know is the Ministry of Finance is working around the clock to be able to plug those leakages. Address the issue of the double taxation exactly, to ensure that those leakages are limited. But what I also want to say, when it comes to tax measures are also affected by the commitments we have with other countries. For example, we are members of the East African community. As East African community, we have a common external tariff. We have bans, we have 0, where we have raw materials, 10% of taxes of goods coming in, semi-finished, and 25% of finished products. But you find sometimes if you want to grow your economy, because for example, Mr. Walugembe was talking about increasing
well, that is Jane Nalunga trying to discuss, and just run out. Feeling okay.
Okay.
Let's first be able to cross over the 60 so she can go. Sisi, if we could just be able to get back to you so you can give your parting shot relating to the tax measures, the ones you think can be able to benefit us in the post-COVID-19 period.
We need to see if there's going to be post-COVID. I think government has to think about it. And I think there ought to be some form of a stimulus package for especially SMEs. I don't know that that is something that has been taken care of, but I presume that under the IMF loan, monies are supposed to be given to UDB, and I think certain small, medium, whatever enterprises are supposed to get some money from them. But I think government ought to think about the whole issue of post-COVID, because if that is not included, if that isn't considered, then obviously tax revenues are obviously going to go down, but the bigger picture is the livelihood of the people. But I think for me, my parting shot is very simple. There's need to have physical discipline, and we ought to see accountable use of these taxes. And there's a whole issue of equity. If you're talking of tax exemptions, if you're talking of tax holidays, let us be fair on who is getting these, because I think every Ugandan ought to get, and let us be open and transparent. Let us know who is getting them, what criteria, and at the end of it, if a person has been given an exemption, do we see any value addition after a particular period of time when these people are leaving, and or when they're closing shop, or, you know, I think for me it's important for people to appreciate, because I think there must be some companies that have been given exemptions and they've done some very good work. But as Ugandans, we need to know in order to appreciate why some of these things are done. Thank you very much.
So much, Sisi Kagaba, for sparing some time to speak to us on this very fora, and we do really appreciate you for your time. Mr. Walugembe now has a very tough battle ahead of himself to be able to at least address us and give his responses to a number of concerns that have been raised. Mr. Walugembe, if you could just be able to hear us, your response towards the issues that have been raised. One of them is the issue about DTS, that is the double taxation agreements that Uganda has, but secondly, in the realm of supporting of the local or domestic investors.
Okay, first of all, before I tackle the issue of double taxation, I want to comment on some of the policy measures that I think, tax measures that government should take in light of COVID. One, you talked about the reduction in the VAT rate. I think this is long overdue. The VAT rate should be reduced. Why? Because it increases disposable income, and people need this money to spend. Without money in the economy, you are not going to resuscitate this economy after this crisis. Two, the pay-as-you-earn threshold needs to be increased. By increasing the pay-as-you-earn threshold, you allow companies to keep that excess cash and to reinvest it in their business. And then, of course, there are other measures like giving tax holidays, creating, giving individual tax income relief. That also allows individual consumers to have more money in order to have more purchasing power. Now, regarding the double taxation agreements, we would not say that we are opposed to the issue of, sorry, we would not be opposed to the issue of having double taxation agreements. However, we would like double taxation agreements to be fair. They should not disadvantage developing countries like Uganda, because Uganda may need some of that money more than the Netherlands or the UK or the US. So double taxation agreements should be crafted in such a way that they do not disadvantage developing countries like ours that are competing for foreign direct investors and need tax income the most. And secondly, the way that these agreements are negotiated should be done in a transparent manner, because where small businesses and civil society find concern is where such agreements are signed without proper local consultation of stakeholders. So that's our position on the issue of double taxation. And then there's the issue of accountability, which Sisi mentioned, that I want to also touch on. it's important to pay tax, but it's more important for that tax to be used properly, to be able to create conditions for business people to thrive. So that's all we ask of government. Once you get the money, use it well. It will incentivize people to come through with their tax obligations. If the money is misused, then people will think twice before paying their tax. And that's why you find a lot of people dodging tax and so on, because they feel that the system is not fair, that after paying their tax, they get nothing in return.
John Walugembe, for sharing your insights with us. We'll get back to you in just a few to be able to at least speak your notion when it comes to taxing more of inputs. Dr. Fred Muhumuza has been able to join us online live on Zoom. And if we could just request you to turn on the video, because we've been seeing you much as you've been able to come in late, but at least I want to pick your notion on how you feel the economy should look in the post-COVID-19 period, but more so with a specific focus to taxation as one of those most important variables. We're going to be taking a deeper dive into that very conversation. Well, Dr. Fred Muhumuza has been able to at least display the video, and we're going to be crossing over to him at least in just a few, but let us first take a very short break. Keep it Smart 24 TV.
Smart 24. Smart business.
Bannayuganda mwenna njagala okubeebaza ennyo obugumiikiriza n'okugondera okuwabulwa kw'abasawo n'okulambikibwa kw'abakulembeze mu kiseera kino ekyokulwanyisa obulwadde bwa COVID-19. Kituufu nti embeera ey'okusiiba awaka ereeseewo obumu n'okutabagana n'ab'omu nju zaffe, naye ate era ereeseewo n'okusoomoozebwa mu maka agamu, kiviiriddeko obutabanguko. Njagala okubakubiriza okweyongera okubeera obumu mu kiseera kino nga tulwanyisa ekirwadde ekya ssennyiga ono omukambwe coronavirus. Abaana mubalabirire era mubayigirize n'emirimu gy'awaka. Bwe tunaakwatira awamu n'okuteeka mu nkola okuwabulwa okutuweereddwa, tujja kuvuunuka ekizibu kino. Baagaliza obulamu obulungi n'okuyita mu kiseera kino nga tuli bawanguzi. Mukama abakuume.
Obubaka buno butuusibwako Minisitule y'ebyobulamu mu ggwanga, Obwakabaka bwa Buganda, UNICEF ne World Health Organization.
a subsidiary of DFCU Limited. DFCU Bank is a leading bank and financial services company founded in Uganda. It came into existence in May 2000 following DFCU's acquisition of Gold Trust Bank to extending universal banking services alongside the pre-existing equity finance, long-term development finance, leasing, and working capital finance. In efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19, DFCU Bank made a donation worth 100 million shillings and assorted sanitation materials towards the COVID-19 response in Uganda.
Support the government. Deal with the numbers on the screen of the Joint Task Force and be part of the people fighting the spread of the virus in Uganda.
Binska Poultry International Limited was founded in 1990 as a poultry breeder farm and has grown steadily over the years to establish itself as one of the best known brands in the Ugandan poultry industry. In such times when the medical staff facilitation has been stretched to its limits, Binska Poultry International Limited donated over 200 trays of eggs for the healthy workers that are working tirelessly to ensure duty coverage despite working longer shifts.
Support the government. Deal with the numbers on the screen of the Joint Task Force and be part of the people fighting the spread of the virus in Uganda. Video telephony comprises the technologies for the reception and transmission of audio-video signs by the users at different locations for more communication between people in real time. Huawei is a leading global provider of information and communication technology, infrastructure and smart devices. In times such as this, where social distancing and staying home are paramount to stopping the spread of COVID-19, Huawei has provided the Ministry of Health with the state-of-the-art video conferencing equipment. Support the government. Deal with the numbers on the screen of the Joint Task Force and be part of the people fighting the spread of the virus in Uganda.
Bannayuganda bannange mbalamusiza nnyo amannya gange nze Namuyimbwa Shanta abanjige mumanyi nga Bad Black abaana ab'obuwala naddala abali ku nsalo za Uganda n'amawanga agatwetoolodde mbasaba okwesonyiwa badreva ba trailer ne biroole mu kiseera kino nga tuli mu lutalo lw'okulwanyisa ekirwadde kya coronavirus ekitadde amawanga gonna ku bunkenke. Mbasaba obutakkiriza badreva ba trailer kubakwatako wadde okubasemberera. Mbakubiriza okugoberera ebiragiro by'abasawo n'okulungamizibwa kw'omukulembeze w'eggwanga. Singa tunaakola ekyo tujja kuwangula nga Mukama Katonda ye mubeezi waffe. Jjukira
Smart 24. Smart Business.
Minutes past the top of the hour of 6 p.m. Thank you so much for keeping it Smart 24 TV. We're coming live to you from the Business Information Center, giving you nothing but the latest business information, and now having a very heartful discussion about the effective tax policies that Uganda should take on in the post-COVID-19 crisis. How should we use our taxes as a magic bullet to change the fortunes of our country? And before we went for the break, we're still having a discussion on how we can broaden the tax base, and is one of those other important things that we really need to embark on. And at least let us have Jen kindly just check on the mantle to tell us how can we be able to broaden the tax base, because you find that all the taxes in Uganda fall on one bracket, the formal sector, which is so narrow, close to 30%. Where is the remaining 70%, and how can we work tooth and nail to bring the 70 on board?
Okay, thank you so much, Hakim. Maybe before I go into the issues of broadening the tax base, I wanted to also to agree with Mr. Warugembe on the issue of reducing VAT. VAT is a regressive tax, and we have been talking about that. Because VAT is, like he said, paid on consumables. That means what a minister pays on sugar is what my grandmother pays. So that one should, it should go. Then on the issue of pay as you earn, I think it's important to raise the threshold in order to ensure that people have a disposable income, because at the end of the day, that money will go back into the system. People will be able to spend more. So we are suggesting maybe the threshold can go up to maybe to 400 or 450. People who earn 450, maybe pay as you earn could start there. Again, before my voice failed me, I was I was talking about the issue of our tax policy in the context of the commitments we have made at regional level, at international level. DTS is one of those agreements which we make, but there are also others, like I was pointing out. We are members of the East African community. We have a common external tariff, which we need to negotiate with them if we are to raise it. And we need to raise it, if we are to talk about import substitution and all that. And also, we are negotiating a number of agreements. For example, we are negotiating the Continental Free Trade Area. Any trade agreement mostly is about reducing your taxes, reducing your tariffs. And it's a double-edged knife, because when you reduce your tariffs, you are losing out on revenue. And two, you are also exposing your weak industries to more competitively priced, produced products. And maybe to go on the issue of the broadening the tax base, it's a little bit really difficult to talk about broadening the tax base, especially when the economy is contracting in this COVID era. But there are areas which we can be able to think about. For example, there is the issue of the digital platforms. today people are buying, you know,
data.
No, on digital platforms like Jumia.
So buying online.
Buying online. And you find even this pandemic is going to increase that trade, you know, but that trade is not taxed. It isn't taxed. And as government is losing a lot of money, and there is also an unfair competition with people who are selling physical, you know, goods, because for them they are taxed. The digital platforms are not taxed. So that's one of the area which we can be able to look at and see how that aspect can be taxed. But you see, when you talk about broadening the tax base, and whatever proposal you bring on board, I think it's important for stakeholders to be able to engage on it, to look at the pros and cons, to look at what needs to be done, even to build the institutional capacity of URA to be able to tax that new sector.
All right, thank you so much, Jane Nalunga. And now let us cross over to you, Mr. Walugembe, if you can be able to hear us. What are some of those alternatives, or what are some of those different things that we can look at taxing in the post-COVID-19 period? And anyway, is the private sector ready for some of these taxes?
Okay, I think the starting point is not to look at where to tax. The starting point is to look at the wastage that exists within the present system. Because you see, the post-COVID situation is going to means that we cannot generate as much money as we have generated before, however much we would like, because business activity is going to slump. So in this kind of new context, it means we also have to look at the expenditure. You can't just look at income, increasing income. No, you have to see sometimes you cannot increase income realistically, in which case you have to look closer at your expenditure to see how can I eliminate waste. And for me, this should be the most important thing right now, because the recent budget that was passed was 45.5 trillion. It was developed in a pre-COVID era. It needs to be relooked at with a view to removing all kinds of wastage, starting with public administration, because we are spending a lot of money in this area that we can easily forego. Secondly, COVID itself, the social distancing measures and so on, have meant that there's going to be a lot of saving, for instance, on air travel, on hotel work, on workshops to be held in hotels and so on. So it means that this budget can actually end up being 25 trillion or so, in which case the pressure on URA to generate a lot of money reduces. But maybe to posit your question, the post-COVID situation is going to look like this. There are some industries that are going to be damaged completely and will take long to recover, like tourism, like entertainment, like transport, like like aviation and so on. So it means that for these sectors, we cannot hope to generate a lot of revenue there. On the contrary, we should look at sectors that may have benefited from the COVID situation. For instance, e-commerce, businesses that operate over e-commerce. How can you tax sectors that are selling online? Because without resolving this situation, it means your revenues are going to dwindle. Because as more and more businesses shift online, you must find a way of taxing businesses without simply taxing data or taxing WhatsApp usage and so on. You must find a way of taxing people based on their sales online. So for me, this would be the quick win for URA. They need to look at how can we start taxing online businesses to ensure that they also contribute to the resource envelope. Because if URA is still in analog, trying to look for tax by moving around in people's shops and so on, then it's not going to work in the post-COVID world. They have to go online. They have to find smart ways of identifying who is selling, who is not, how much are they earning, and so on and so forth. So I know it's a tough call, but it's definitely doable, and I hope that once the target is reduced, it can also give them some breathing space to innovate.
Just help us to be able to identify the tax compliance strategies that the Uganda Revenue Authority can take on, because the pandemic has really hit some of these small and medium enterprises, and maybe the only option that they have in the post-COVID-19 period is to avoid tax. What are some of those tax compliance mechanisms that you think the Uganda Revenue Authority can take on to ensure that they can collect more in terms of taxes?
I think URA should simply not be preoccupied about collecting tax. I think URA and the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Finance should first be preoccupied with ensuring that SMEs survive, because you cannot tax a dead SME. So simply saying, oh, how do we, it's a bit selfish, because if URA and government is simply concerned about making up for the budget shortfall, it shows a lack of concern for the ordinary SME who is going through difficulty. So in my opinion, let us put our hands together and our heads together and see how can we put in place a stimulus package for SMEs. I know government has been discussing this for long. They need to involve all of us because we are all stakeholders. We may have suggestions that may help to ensure that businesses survive. Once businesses survive, it is easy to tax. But at this point, we don't even know who will survive, who will die. So it's hard to strategize before you know whether the patient has actually died or survived. So in my view, the URA should do a proper post-mortem once the lockdown is opened, to see the state of the economy, to come up working with other experts to come up with realistic estimates of what can be collected, and to look for places where they have not gone before. And I've mentioned the easier way to increase compliance is to focus on online businesses, because businesses are going to shift online. The COVID crisis has shown people that the future is online. So you're going to see more people saying, no, I'm not going to pay rent for 2 million. I'm going to pay rent for 5 million. Why? When I can sell online. So if people are shifting online, it means URA must find ways of taxing trade over these online platforms. They should go beyond, as I said, simply levying a standard tax on data usage or WhatsApp usage or things like this, because these kinds of taxes simply penalize the poor. Instead, they should look at making sure that those people who sell the most online also pay their tax. So for me, if I were the Commissioner General, and good enough, the new Commissioner General has an IT background, so he's very competent to help the to steer the institution as they discuss these issues.
Again, before sharing with us that insight, let me pick your notions on this, Mrs. Jane Nalunga. You realize that now taxing of online businesses is what you are advocating for, but most of these online businesses are developed by our innovators, the young innovators, all right? You realize that these are young people that have just come up with these new apps to be able to get some little bit of money. Then don't you think taxing them would decapitate and incidentally force them out of business?
Not really. You know, when we talk about e-commerce, they are big businesses. We are talking about Alibaba, Walmart. Those are big businesses, you know? And we can be able to have exemptions. It's allowed to say if your threshold is so much, you won't pay, you know. But they are big online platforms, multinationals, who are using, like this one on books. What is it called?
Amazon, right?
Amazon, you know. That's what we are looking at, you know. And we can borrow a leaf from India. How India, because India has already started taxing you know, all those Alibabas, Amazon, and all those people. So those are the ones we are talking about.
Don't you think we will have to now discriminate because you realize we have some young innovators who have come up with such apps, right? So should we say we do not tax our young innovators and tax these big multinationals?
No, it isn't. But we have been talking about tax exemptions here. We can give tax exemptions. We can be able to have threshold. Like I said, any new area for taxation, these are the issues which we need to debate so as to agree whether it should be taxed, who should be taxed, what are the pros, what are the cons. But when you look at the debate today, it's on table that we have to tax that trade, the e-trade. But by the way, there is also a push from these companies, multinationals, not to tax them. So it's also a contested issue. But I think it is very important that we also tax those businesses. They are very lucrative. But maybe what I wanted, if you give me some few minutes, what I wanted to add on also is the issue of the leakages. This issue has been coming on. And 2 years back, the Africa Union came up with a group of eminent people, you know, to discuss the issue of illicit financial flows from Africa. And it's in billions and trillions of money every year. That report is called the Mbeki report. In fact, one of Miss Irene Ovonji Odida was on that panel. And it came up with a number of recommendations which we can be able to implement to be able to address the IFF, those flows. Then lastly, one issue which I want to say about increasing taxes. Increasing taxes is not bad per se, you know, because I have been hearing everybody say, no, we shouldn't increase taxes at all. You know, it depends. Taxation is a tool to promote development. Like I said in the beginning, taxation is not an end in itself, that you want to tax to get money. You tax to grow the economy. So the moment you say, for example, like now today, the whole issue is about industrialization, import substitution, and so on. If we want to do that, and we want to use tax as a tool to be able to do that, there are taxes which we need to increase automatically. You know, taxes on imports, we have to increase them. We have to increase taxes on exports. Export taxes are very, very critical.
Wouldn't we be then decapitating? Wouldn't we be then shooting ourselves in the foot?
When we do what?
We tax the exports.
When we tax the
exports.
Let me give you an example what export taxes mean. For example, if you want to add value on maize, you want to do cereals, that means you have to discourage the export of grain maize, or even the flour to Kenya. You say if you take grain, I'm going to tax you 100%. So you are discouraging the export of raw materials so that you can have them inside, so that you can add value to them. So when you look at that and you say, we want to do, this is where I want to go. How do we use tax as a tool to be able to help us to go there? Then we can be able to see what what sectors can we tax and where we can remove taxes.
So for the taxing of the exports, for matters of promotion of value addition, right? And then what about for the taxing of the imports? Wouldn't we then be shooting ourselves in the foot? We are well aware that we do not have some of the capacities to be able to manufacture some of the things here.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we are going to do a blanket taxing of increase of taxes on imports. For example, you need to agree that we want to build the textile sector. Is it textile and apparels? You know, we want to do that. Automatically, you have to increase taxes on all these Chinese clothes we are putting on second-hand clothes. And I remember the East African community sat and said we have to increase taxes on second-hand clothes. You know what happened? You know, we get so many second-hand clothes from America. The Americans said you touch second-hand clothes, no AGOA. But those are things which we can be able to discuss and say, AGOA or no AGOA, we are going to grow our textile industry because it has so many backward linkages, cotton and all that.
All right. How can we be able to then leverage our forward and backward linkages? Let us now be able to join an economist and also a lecturer at Makerere University, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. If you can be able to hear us, kindly check us, give us the discussion, at least from your point of view, before you can give some of the responses to some of the issues as they've been raised. All right, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, we're going to be getting back to you in just a few, if we could be able to just fix that audio and get to hear you pretty well. And let us first pick on you, Mr. John Walugembe, if you're still there and you can be able to hear us. How can we leverage our forward and backward linkages, at least when it comes to, collection of taxes? How can we be able to leverage and save our forward and backward linkages for some of these small and medium enterprises, so we can create enough tax for government and then be able to allow some breathing space for some of these small and medium enterprises?
So I think the starting point is that we should ensure that you don't have big multinationals monopolizing the value chain. So what we lack in this country is something called a competition authority that ensures that there is fair competition in the marketplace. Because in a capitalistic or in a market economy, government plays a crucial role in playing the role of an umpire. So if you have a company manufacturing, it plants, it buys land and plants, it adds value, it packages, it transports, it exports. It is not creating opportunities for others within its own value chain. And if we had a competition authority that would hold such a business to account, they would say, please concentrate on manufacturing beer, but in terms of transporting, please allow SMEs to do that. If you want to plant, then you have outgrowers and so on. So this is the way you create backward and forward linkages, because it means that every company in its own value chain creates opportunities for other smaller businesses and creates jobs for others. So this is something we need to look at critically. How do we ensure that we have an authority that holds businesses to account in terms of competition so that there's fair play? Second, how do we ensure that SMEs SMEs are supported to address what we call their supply side constraints? Because opportunities may be there in the value chain, but if SMEs are not capacitated to take advantage of those opportunities, either through training or through technology transfer or through linkages to bigger suppliers, then that becomes a big problem. Then of course we need to also look at the issue of finance, because right now we've been talking about tax, but the other fiscal measure that government should look seriously at is its budget as a fiscal tool to help resuscitate the economy. So it means after cutting out unnecessary expenditure from the budget, you have to look at how do we spend money in a way that stimulates particular industries that may be down. So those are all measures that government needs to look at very seriously. You talked, I had that discussion with Madam Nalunga about taxes, either on imports or on exports. Now, of course, because we are part of the East African Common Market, and because we have this common external tariff, we may not have the liberty to place unilateral taxes on goods and so on as we see fit. Of course, we can do that, and it has been done in some instances, but that constrains us a lot in terms of what kind of measures we can take to ensure that we stop imports. Our view, by the way, is not so much focusing on stopping imports. It's very much about building the capacity of local SMEs to compete favorably against those imports. Because saying that you're going to place tariffs and so on, prohibitive tariffs on imports so that you completely keep them out, I don't think it's sustainable in the 21st century. So the focus should very much be on how do we ensure that SMEs are competitive and can take advantage of the opportunities both locally, regionally, and internationally. Because it's after that money is made that now you can be at liberty to tax. But if a company is not making money, then you can send all kinds of notices and so on, and they won't create money without a viable economic activity that is bringing profit to them.
John Walugembe, for sharing your insights into that. You could see the reaction that is coming in from Ms. Jane Nalunga. She's going to be able to give the reaction to that. But let us first cross over to Dr. Fred Muhumuza. You've been following the discussion. You've heard what the different or the other panelists are saying about the same. Kindly give us the context of this discussion, at least from your view.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Hakim? Oh, great. I think the first thing, and the discussion has literally leveraged quite a number of aspects, that taxation is not just about raising revenue for government. It is also a development policy, because taxation is a function of the functionality of the economy itself. So at the end of the day, you want the economy to be growing, then you capture a portion of that and send it into government and be able to send it back into the functionality of the economy. And I think that's why the discussion of how are the taxes being used was coming from. Because if you tax and you don't put back in a way that will grow the economy, then your future taxes will not become through. So the issue of governance and accountability is not just about how did you use the money by receipts, but also by where did you put it. Do we see an opportunity that where you put the money will enable us to grow the taxation going forward? And then there were a number of discussions of exemptions, which literally need a discussion on, because they actually deny you an opportunity. And if you're not careful with exemptions, you can easily exempt companies that would actually be making a contribution. We have had this discussion when Kenya reduced across the board the corporation taxes, and so that was the wrong thing to do, because some companies during COVID are actually making profits. So those don't need to be exempted because they are doing well. They are in the priority areas, as people have been terming them. You only want to exempt company on a case-by-case basis or sector-by-sector basis. So if our exemptions are not speaking to that, we will have a problem of losing off taxes we should have picked off. But there are also issues that we need to support government that they are working with. We are looking at areas of over transfer pricing, where even the companies that have not been exempted are actually cheating, because some of these are multinationals, some of these are using all sorts of ways of avoiding the taxes. They are making profits, but because of over invoicing, transfer pricing, they kind of declare that they are not making the profit, and then we lose out. And here we need to support government measures to come and pick up some of these taxes. I think the final part of for now is the whole issue of a developmental tax system, where you might appear to be losing off taxes if you increase the threshold on pay as you earn. But remember, Uganda's main source of revenue, besides the income taxes, is consumption taxes. So if you raise the threshold of pay as you earn, these people are going to earn this money and go and consume taxable items. Now you get a double benefit in the sense that the people are better off because you left them with more money to spend and increase their welfare, but also you have still captured whatever you let them keep by way of the consumption taxes that they are going to be picking up through the spending that they do. So there are a lot of dynamics that need to come into tax policy. I think the other part we want to add is taxation is going to be very central to our recovery process. We should not be looking at short term. All these debts we are picking up today can only be repaid through taxation. Now, how are we investing in the tax collection system? Because we're not going to turn up in 2022 to begin asking Revenue Authority to collect the taxes when we have not invested in Revenue Authority in 2020. So some of the loans we are picking up today should not all go into health, into infrastructure by way of roads, into recurrent expenditure by way of paying people's salaries. We need to invest in the infrastructure of the Revenue Authority so that in another 2 years, these investments will begin to bear and they will give us a return by way of increasing tax revenues. Because all these taxes will be the only one to deal with the debts we are having. If we don't do that, then we're going to get to 2022 and we begin to borrow to pay the previous loans. And we do want to avoid that by literally strengthening the capacity of the Uganda Revenue Authority to implement and be able to pick the taxation once the economy begins to grow going forward. At this point, I think that's my submission.
Fred, if you could just also be able to give us your analysis and your take on the multinationals being able to pay tax on their net profits, and then the local companies for them being able to pay tax on their gross turnover. What is your analysis about the same?
I think usually even the local companies, the law is clear. It's supposed to be on their net profit because they are deductibles, in which if you have incurred expenses in the process of developing the product or service that you offer, our tax system allows you to remove those as non-taxable items. So I don't think there is an inbuilt bias within the law to say the others will be net profit and these ones will be gross. No, they remove their costs and then they are able to pay off on the real profit that they have earned. Now, some of course, the advantage that the multinationals gain is because they are big companies. They will have an internal person to read what are the provisions and incentives within the Ugandan tax system, and they benefit from all of them. Now, unfortunately, our local companies, many of them do not have either that capacity or even that capacity just don't pick up the tax advisory services, which would help them to say, here you can be exempt, here you can be exempt, there you can pay the taxes. And we have many of them who are paying just kind of presumptive tax because somebody has no records. So when the tax authorities come in, they just say, by the look of your business, you're going to pay 20 million. And the fellow now goes to struggle to raise the 20 million. Yet if he found 2 million or one to actually find a tax advisor, they would tell him, no, if you come clean and put your records before the Revenue Authority and they assess you, stop being informal, become formal so that they can assess you clearly, you will not be paying the 20 million. But our people want to remain informal. So I think it is important that we give them tax education. They also willingly become formal. They will realize some of them are paying taxes when actually they shouldn't be paying taxes. Now, because the multinationals invest in that side of the story, they are able to only pay the taxes they should be able to pay. And then the locals complain and say the tax is unfair to us. But they are the ones who have literally, by trying to hide and dodge, they have put themselves into a very difficult situation that the law cannot help them and the policy can't help them, even when it's available for them all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fred Muhumuza. Let me just pick your notion, Jen Nalunga, on this one here. I want to be able to get your reaction when it comes to Mr. John Walugembe's submission, because it's quite contentious, and then you'll be able to at least help us to reconcile the position between the two extremes, the government's quest of taking a lot of taxes and then promotion of the local industries on the other hand.
Okay, thank you so much, Hakim. The issue where I differ with Mr. Walugembe is the issue of import taxes. If I got him right, he said they don't support raising import taxes, but they want to enhance the capacity of the SMEs to be able to produce and to compete. What I'm saying is that many economists, when we talk about the word protectionism, it's like a dirty word. No? no protectionism, we are liberalized, you know, yet today it can't work, you know. Today when we talk about, when you hear about the US-China war, it's a trade war. US even went ahead and raised their taxes on steel by 40%. He said, China, you are killing my industries. You know, so protection is okay. And if we are taking the path of industrialization, import substitution, for example, there is no way you can be able to say that we are going to grow our textile industry. And you say we live with that second-hand clothes to come in without any increase in taxes, Chinese textiles to come in, and you say you are going to tell people to grow cotton and grow the textile industry. For me, I don't see any problem with raising taxes. ECOWAS, let me give you an example of ECOWAS in West Africa. ECOWAS, they have earmarked a number of sectors where they want to industrialize, because they also have they have also a common external tariff. And they said they are going to increase some to 60% taxes, others to 50%. So for me, I don't see any problem saying that this is where I want to go. This sector, we want to grow it, we want to increase the taxes. There are other sectors where, there are other things where we can't compete. For example, maybe you want machinery, and machines from China cheap, and you want to use them to industrialize. So we need to be careful. We need to sit and be able to say, here we need it cheaply, this one we want it, you know. Okay.
You see, I really wanted to know or pick your notions just on, do you think protectionism, don't you think it's a luxury for some of these big economies like China? If China chooses to take on protectionism, it can't just be okay. But for an economy like Uganda, don't you think protectionism? But I think it's Uganda which we need protectionism more than China. Like I said, it isn't a blanket. It isn't blanket protectionism. There are things which we need cheaply. We want these maybe laptops. We want them. We can't manufacture them here, you know, but we want to grow. If we are to grow the backward and forward linkages in the textile industry, what needs to be done? Like Dr. Mkumza has said, when you look at tax is a development tool to help you develop your economy, you know. So let us look at it in that way. All right, thank you so much. Let us now engage you, Mr. John Walugembe, if you can be able to hear us still. Mrs. Jane Nalunga believes that, I think it's one of the most important things, and taxation is one of those most important tools when it comes to development. How can we be able to tap into taxation and then do not hurt the economy on the other hand, as you also give your parting shot?
Please repeat the question.
Just help us understand the dynamics that play into protectionism for a country. Can Uganda take on protectionism for protection of its domestic farms or the small and medium enterprises? If we are to do that, is that the rightful path? And then finally, your recommendations as we seek to finalize the entire broadcast.
Well, the challenge with protectionism for a small economy like ours is that it's likely to lead to what I would call retaliation. And so as you impose tariffs on imports from other countries, they are likely to retaliate. And if they retaliate, you don't know whether that will impact you the more. So, secondly, whereas countries like South Korea and China and so on used protectionism to grow their domestic industries and to become successful, they have now, including the US and all these countries, they all use protectionism to grow their domestic industries. They have now created an international trading order that penalizes any form of protectionism. And for small countries like ours, you can take a lot of unnecessary garbage by adopting these kinds of tariffs. So that's why countries are choosing instead to use non-tariff barriers. And for us, we would encourage government, because if you look at some of these agreements that we have signed in the ESC, it's not because it's not tariffs that are stopping us from exporting to those countries. It's non-tariff barriers that these countries have imposed to advantage their domestic industries. So for me, I would instead go for non-tariff barriers, because they are a clever way in which you can protect your domestic industry without appearing to do so and without attracting retaliation. And I would also agree with Madam Nalunga that taxation is one of the best tools that government can use to grow its industry. So they have to use taxation very cleverly, and that's why I said that taxation can be used as a tool to incentivize production, because through taxation you can create demand for particular goods and products. Through taxation you can discourage imports and so on and so forth. So it's a good tool, but we have to be very clever regarding the way we use it. If we impose explicit tariffs, it may be difficult for us to avoid retaliation. On the other hand, if we use non-tariff barriers and other clever ways of keeping competition out, then we can be lucky. But just imposing tariffs and just relying on non-tariff barriers is not enough. We have to build supply-side capacities to ensure that our SMEs are able to take on the opportunities that come, both locally and regionally or internationally.
Walugembe, for sharing with us your insights when it comes to the non-tariff barriers, which Mrs. Jane Nalunga can be able to at least comment at later. Let us cross over to you, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, to be able to explain to us how can we reconcile the two sides, because one of the panelists is talking about non-tariff barriers being very, very hard for us to take, and then the other is talking about the protectionism on the other hand. How can we be able to reconcile both sides and get maybe the rightful balance of what is needed to develop Uganda's economy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Hakim. I think the point is actually it's not even that the two are in conflict, because you'll need both of them to harmonize and synergize with each other to propel the industry. But both of them are speaking, I think, to different spaces. If anybody has done what we call a SWOT, you're actually looking at weaknesses. If there are weaknesses internal to the company itself and within the country, you don't want to protect those through protectionism. Protectionism should only be dealing with the threats that are coming in from out there. And then you should also be mindful of the users of the service. That's why we always say, don't protect a weak industry that is inefficient, because it's going to pass on its internal costs to the citizens. So you must be balancing out, what do I want the citizens to have? So I'm not going to tax Ugandan second-hand clothes that are coming in here because I want to protect the local industry, when actually the local industry has its own internal weaknesses that need to be resolved differently. And there was that earlier discussion. When you're actually giving a tax exemption, in a sense, you're protecting your local industry. You're trying to give it a head start on those foreign companies. But then some people will be saying, don't give exemptions, but give protection. But already the exemption was a protection in a sense to give my local companies a head start. So it's not that the exemption is bad, but you need to streamline it and be very strategic in how you give it. All Ugandan companies, there has been a negotiation for them to have a subsidy on electricity. Certainly that is a protection measure to cut down their costs, so that by the time some other product comes in from abroad, the Ugandans will have used less in terms of electricity, so they have an advantage over that imported product. Now we need to evaluate all of these to say, before we protect, available, designed to give Ugandan companies a head start, but have not been able to do it down that line. But there is certainly a need for us to see, how do we protect our own? How do we nurture them? And this is going to be critically important in the after COVID era. We want URA to literally look at these as sick cows, which you should not be taxing at this point, but rather trying to nurture them and treat them, so that come next month, next year, they are strong again for you to begin to tax. So at this point, we need to balance out that. So I can hear both of them. Let's not protect internal weaknesses. Let's teach our business managers, let them streamline their functionality, and then we give the protection against any threats that are external, which they cannot manage without a government hand. Otherwise, we'll go down the drain and lose the revenue and not get the companies working.
A minute, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, you can just give us your parting shot in just a minute as we seek to recapitulate the entire broadcast.
I think the main thing is let's rethink our taxation policy as a development tool. That even when it brings in revenue, the revenue should be channeled back into developmental aspects. And this is a conversation not just for the executive. This is also a conversation for the administrators. It was very unfair for Parliament to go ahead and create cities and other municipalities at this point in time when we need all the money going back into the developmental aspects of the economy, or at least don't even tax these companies so that they can get back on their feet. So the conversation is broader than just who do we tax or should we not tax. Let's not put a burden on this economy because we need as much money left with the private sector so that it can limp back, bounce back, and then come 2021, we can begin to see how do we tax it. So it's Parliament and everybody in the executive need to cut down on those unnecessary costs so that we don't overload the economy at the time we are borrowing to make it come back to life. Thank you.
I don't intend to engage you more, but I just wanted to just pick your thought about the budget that was recently debated. Do you see it being realistic? Is it based on realistic macroeconomic assumptions?
That budget, I would call it provisional. We had to comply and pass a budget according to the law. But I am very sure the government itself is right now rethinking, and the minister actually hinted on it. He said, I am going to come back with new proposals. So I'm waiting the minister and the government, I'm sure they are going to come back and design a budget that speaks to the kind of not even post-COVID. COVID is still going to be with us. How do you design a budget that speaks to the next environment or the current environment? So I'm very hopeful government is going to come back, and I pray the politicians and the executive will agree on the best way forward.
I just can't engage you more. Thank you so much, Dr. Fred Muhumuza, for joining us for today's discussion.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Hakeem.
All right, right there you have it from Dr. Fred Muhumuza joining us live from his home. And let us seek to engage you, let us seek to engage you, Mrs. Jen Nalunga, in just 3 minutes, just to react to Mr. John Walugembe's submission, and then to comment on the position that has been agreed on by Dr. Fred Muhumuza, that these two do not work in conflict, all right? They work in tandem with one another, but you're just speaking in different contexts.
Okay, thank you so much, Hakeem. One, for me, this issue, it's about giving our SMEs a fighting chance to survive. You know, the attrition rate of our SMEs is very high. Maybe Mr. Walugembe can tell us, you know, companies last, those SMEs last maybe 1 year, 2 years. But how do we give those companies a fighting chance to survive? By using tax as one of the tools which can be used to help them survive. You know, and for me, I could go for protectionism. For me, I don't see any problem with it because there is no way, you know. For example, a company, you know, an SME can compete with clothes from China. No way, you know. Even if you say you are going to, you can be able. Those are additional additional issues you can do. Strengthen management, do all that. But at the end of the day, if the cost price when you go to the market, you know, one is selling at 100 and you are selling at 500, you automatically out of business. You know, so, but the whole issue is to look at holistically at a company and how we can be able to use it. Two, the issue of the legal framework around which we are operating. Like I told you, whatever we are discussing here, we are not doing it in a vacuum. When we say we can increase taxes, we have made commitments, and we need to rethink that. Like I told you, AGOA, they told us wanted to increase taxes on second-hand clothes. AGOA, the US said, you do it, we remove AGOA. So we have made commitments, but we need to rethink, to renegotiate those commitments. We are going to negotiate that. We are negotiating the Continental Free Trade Area. And for me, I wish the SMEs would be there to be able to say, please don't reduce those taxes so much. We have giants within the region who are looking at our market, you know. So I think we know we have made commitments, but it's time to rethink those commitments. And second last, we have also, you know, tax is also about the economy, the entire economy. You have been talking about the backward and forward linkages. When you look at our investment code, what we have committed in our investment code, there are no ring-fenced areas. We give people establishment rights if they want to do retail, if they want to do small-scale producing, and that affects the vibrance of the value chains. We have an example of an investor who is in Uganda growing coffee, not adding coffee, growing coffee. They displaced small-scale producers who were growing coffee. So why don't we ring fence? Say if you are an investor, don't go into farming, small-scale producing. You can have a nucleus farm, but don't do farming. Let the buy from the small-scale producers, but do make a company, do a factory to add value. So that's some of the thinking. But lastly, I want to emphasize the issue which was raised by Dr. Mukumuza about the revenue cycle. The way you mobilize, the way you allocate, the way you utilize, it's a cycle. We determine how you are going to mobilize again. So that's why the budget is also very important. I rest my case.
Well, you can't get any more better, or you just can't get it any more better, at least from my dear esteemed panelists tonight, the ones that we've been discussing with. At least rethinking of Uganda's taxation policy has been raised in the debate, and then rechanneling of this money to ensure that we can find the money all channeled to those developmental projects. I'm just picking out a few insights out of those. So protectionism using the non-tariff barriers and protectionism using the tariff barriers can work in tandem, but it depends on the context. It depends on what you are protecting. Are you protecting an industry that is largely stronger, or you're protecting an industry that is inherently weak and thus cannot bring back the return? But then on the other hand, thinking about the value-added tax rates in Uganda, Uganda's value-added tax rates add up to 18%. Highest in the region. Kenya is was standing at 16. It revised it down further due to COVID-19, down to 14%. What are some of those strategies? Can they trickle down to increase the amount of money that is at least possessed by each and every other person? Revision of the pay as you earn, or payee, as it is normally called by many people, is also very prudent. But then it is a very tiresome combination, or it is a very hard combination, because we want to collect revenue on one hand, and on the other hand, we want to leave some money in the hands of the people. So how can we be able to put the thumb on the scale to get the rightful balance of the revenue and then leaving some people with some kind of disposable income? We always come up with the discussions that spark of debates, and maybe the policymakers will be able to hear and just know that we are striving for the highest global standards of business broadcasting, and we are committed. It is a journey that we are taking to ensure that we are fully committed. It is a journey in which we will ensure that we leave no stone unturned in terms of coming up with those conversations that stir growth within the business fraternity. And it is a journey that will see full commitment and the total destination when it comes to coming up with a business broadcast that indeed trickle down to you as a business personnel, but each and every other person that is working within this economy. I aspire to inspire before I just get to inspire each and every other person. But before that, at least we know to it that we have a lot lined up for you in this particular broadcast. Otherwise, my name is Hakim Wampamba. Thank you so much for watching the Business Think Tank that has been a successful one. On behalf of the entire production team and each and every other person that has been watching, we bid valediction to you. Enjoy the rest of the evening. My name is Hakim Wampamba.
Smart 24.